The HR director looked my husband dead in the eyes and told him his ADA accommodation, a doctor's note to work from home after major surgery, had no value in their company. That was the moment they stopped dealing with a victim and started dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose. This story is a wild ride of corporate incompetence and sweet justice. If you're ready for the payoff, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. My husband, John, was 1 week away from total organ failure when they found it. For a decade, a procession of dismissive doctors had listened to his litany of symptoms, the fatigue that felt like walking through water, the strange pains that came and went like ghosts, and had offered the same tired advice. It was stress. He should change his diet. He needed to lose a few pounds. They patted him on the back, wrote a prescription for something useless, and sent him on his way, never once looking deep enough to see the truth. But a new doctor, fresh out of residency with eyes that hadn't yet learned to glaze over, listened with an unnerving stillness. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And then, with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver of both fear and hope down my spine, he ordered an emergency MRI. Less than 24 hours later, John was being wheeled through a set of sterile double doors, his hand gripping mine until the very last second. What they removed from him was a monster, a 10-pound, non-cancerous tumor the size of a watermelon that had been growing in silence, a secret parasite stealing his life from the inside. It had spent years wrapping itself around his organs, slowly, methodically crushing them. The surgeon, a woman with tired lines around her eyes but a steady, competent voice, told us he was lucky, a word that felt both entirely wrong and miraculously right. Another week, she said. Maybe 2. And his body would have begun a cascade of system failures from which there would be no return. So, when I brought him home, I understood I wasn't bringing back the same man. The John I drove home from the hospital was a fragile echo of himself, a stranger borrowing a familiar face. The change was stark, almost violent. He'd gone from a solid, comforting size 20, a man whose hugs felt like coming home to a gaunt size 8. The first time he tried on his old jeans, they slid right off his hips and pooled around his ankles. We stood there in the bedroom, staring at the pile of denim, and neither of us knew whether to laugh or cry. His wedding ring, once snug, was now a dangerous liability, and he had to slip it into a drawer for safekeeping. The healthy fullness of his face was gone, replaced by sharp angles and hollows beneath his eyes that spoke of a battle fought in the dark. He moved with a deliberate, tentative grace, as if he was relearning how to occupy his own body, afraid that a sudden movement might cause the whole fragile structure to collapse. The silence in the car on the way home was a living thing, thick and heavy between us. I wanted to fill it with cheerful chatter, with plans for the future, but the words felt like lies. I'd glance over and see him staring out the window, his gaze unfocused. He wasn't seeing the familiar streets of our neighborhood, he was looking through them, at a memory or a future that only he could see. He had survived. But survival, we were learning, was not an event. It was a long, slow process, and it had left a deep and invisible wound on his soul. All he wanted, he'd whispered to me in the pale, antiseptic light of his hospital room, was for things to be normal again, to slip back into the simple, predictable rhythm of his old life. His first day back at the office came a month later. The morning was filled with a nervous, crackling energy. He stood in front of the closet for a long time, just looking, before finally pulling out a crisp blue dress shirt we'd bought just weeks before his surgery. It hung from his shoulders like a sheet on a scarecrow. He didn't comment, just methodically buttoned it up. His knuckles more prominent than I remembered. He cinched his belt to the very last hole, a small, grim testament to all he had lost. He knew what was coming. The questions, the stares, the well-meaning but exhausting curiosity. He had rehearsed his lines like an actor preparing for a difficult role. A simple, bland statement designed to be a conversational dead end. It was just a basic emergency surgery, he'd say, paired with a small, unconvincing smile. But I'm all good now. And for most of the morning, it worked. People were kind. They'd approach his desk, their faces a mixture of concern and relief. And his prepared line was enough. Glad to have you back. Man, they'd say, giving his shoulder a gentle pat before retreating, leaving him in peace. For a few hours, the familiar hum of the office, the clatter of keyboards, the low drone of conference calls, the scent of stale coffee was a comforting blanket. It was mundane. It was boring. And it was beautiful. It almost felt normal. And then Aubrey arrived at his desk. John knew of her. In the way you know of a pothole on a familiar road, you learn to steer around it. She worked in marketing, and her self-appointed role in the company was that of a health and wellness evangelist. She was deep in some multi-level marketing scheme, forever hawking shakes and supplements in the break room. Her reputation for giving unsolicited, judgmental advice on people's lunches was legendary. But their departments were on different floors, and their paths rarely crossed. He'd never considered her a threat. She didn't approach him with the cautious sympathy of his other coworkers. She strode over with the unblinking confidence of a zealot, her heels clicking an aggressive rhythm on the floor. She stopped directly in front of his desk, and her eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of his body. From his new, hollowed-out collarbones down to his shoes. It wasn't a look of concern. It was an appraisal, like a butcher inspecting a piece of meat. The small talk and polite inquiries from everyone else vanished from the air, sucked into the vacuum of her presence. She didn't ask how he was feeling. She didn't say it was good to see him. She crossed her arms, a gesture of superiority, and her voice cut through the office hum. I wish you'd come to me instead of taking such drastic measures. You'll just gain it all back. You know, I'll be waiting when you do. John told me later that the words didn't seem real at first. It was like his brain refused to process them, buffering in disbelief. A hot, prickling sensation washed over his skin, the physical manifestation of pure shock. All his prepared lines, his polite social armor, shattered into a million pieces. He could feel the eyes of his nearby colleagues on him, a heavy weight of shared embarrassment. They looked down at their keyboards, pretending not to have heard. But the sudden, intense silence was a confirmation. He just stared at her, his mouth hanging slightly open, a fish gasping for air. His mind was a blank wall of static. Her lips curled into a small, triumphant smirk. His stunned silence was, to her, an admission of defeat. She turned with a flick of her ponytail and clicked her way back to her side of the office. John finally exhaled, a ragged, shaky breath, and turned back to his computer. But the spreadsheet on the screen had become a meaningless jumble of lines and numbers. He spent the rest of the week trying to forget it, burying the incident under a pile of work. He told himself she was just a deeply unhappy person, a social landmine to be avoided. But the cruelty of it lingered, a poisonous little seed planted in the fragile soil of his recovery. A week later, she found him again. It was late afternoon. The office winding down for the day. John was trying to focus on one last email when a flash of neon pink appeared in his doorway. It was Aubrey. She had changed out of her business casual attire and was now clad in skin-tight spandex leggings and a workout top that looked vacuum-sealed to her body. The air around her was an aggressive combination of recent physical exertion and cheap, sickly sweet body spray. "Hey," she said, her tone bright and condescending. She leaned against the doorframe, posing. "I'm heading to the gym. You should come with me. I know you're probably too embarrassed to go alone looking like that. But don't worry. I'll fix you." Fix him. The words echoed the surgeon's, but twisted into something grotesque. The surgeon had fixed a life-threatening problem. Aubrey saw his survival as a flaw to be corrected. John looked down at his own hands, resting on the desk. His doctor's words were a constant loop in his head. No lifting anything over 10 pounds. He wasn't allowed to carry our son. A wriggling, precious 30-pound weight. He couldn't take out the trash or bring in the groceries. The thought of stepping into a gym, a place of intentional strain and exertion, with this relentless, predatory woman was so profoundly, darkly absurd. He can't recall his exact words. A mumbled mess about doctor's orders, about not being cleared for any activity. He just remembers the thick, exhausting fog that filled his head. The desperate need for her to just go away. Her cheerful facade dropped instantly, replaced by a flash of raw contempt. She rolled her eyes so hard he could practically hear it. "Fine," she spat, the words sharp as broken glass. "Get fat again. Lazy people always do." And then she was gone. He didn't move for a long time. Just sat there in the quiet of his office, the insult echoing in the silence. The final straw came the next day. A kind colleague, Sarah, intercepted him by the coffee machine. Her expression deeply troubled. She told him, in a hushed, apologetic voice, that he had been the main topic of an interdepartmental meeting he had missed. The bitter irony was that he'd missed it to attend a post-op check-in with his surgeon. Sarah recounted how Aubrey had stood up and launched into a long, rambling monologue about him, disguised as professional concern. She questioned his ability to handle his workload. If he doesn't have the dedication to manage his own body, Aubrey had apparently announced to a room full of managers, how can we expect him to be dedicated to his projects? She had framed his life-saving surgery as a lazy shortcut, an indicator of a flawed character. It was a public assassination of his professional reputation. That was the line. This was no longer just about personal cruelty. This was about his livelihood. Armed with a detailed log of every encounter, John went to HR. He was not a confrontational man. He simply wanted the harassment to stop. He wanted to be left alone. The mediation was a farce from the moment it began. The room was a sterile, beige box under the hum of fluorescent lights that made John's eyes water. The HR representative, Mark, had the weary, put-upon air of a man who would rather be anywhere else. And Aubrey sat across the table, radiating an aura of wronged innocence. John calmly presented the facts, the initial comment, the gym ambush, the calculated slander in the meeting. He finished by saying, "I just want her to be instructed to leave me alone. That's all." Then, it was Aubrey's turn. She didn't deny anything. Instead, her face crumpled and she produced a stream of what had to be the fakest tears John had ever seen. She spoke in a choked, therapeutic babble about how his dramatic physical change had been incredibly triggering for her. She claimed his new, A thinner body was a constant, painful assault on her own wellness journey. In a breathtaking feat of psychological gymnastics, she painted herself as the victim of his survival. She said he should have been more considerate, should have warned her and others that his appearance would be changing so drastically. John was dumbfounded. He looked at Aubrey's trembling lip, then at Mark's blank, bureaucratic face. I barely had enough time to warn my own wife and arrange for someone to pick our son up from daycare, John said, his voice quiet but shaking with a rage he hadn't felt before. I don't owe her anything. Mark, the HR rep, sighed. A long, impatient sound. He tapped his pen on his legal pad. Tap, tap, tap. He looked at John as if he were a difficult child. Look, Mark said, his tone oozing condescension. While we can't legally require you to disclose your medical history, it would probably de-escalate the situation if you just told her what kind of surgery you had. It might give her some perspective. The suggestion was so profoundly inappropriate, so stunningly unethical, that for a moment, John could only stare. In that beige, airless room, he felt a cold, terrifying clarity. He was not talking to a neutral arbiter. He was talking to an accomplice. No, John said, his voice now flat and hard. I am not obligated to share my private medical information with a colleague. Her inability to manage her emotions is not my responsibility. Her behavior is harassment, and I want it to stop. Mark leaned back, a flicker of a smirk on his lips. It was the expression of a man with a tiny sliver of power, enjoying its use. Well, he said with a final, dismissive shrug, if you're not willing to be a team player and help us help you, then we can't stop her from bullying you. The drive home was wrapped in a thick, suffocating silence. The rain had started, and the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers was the only sound. Neither of us turned on the radio. There were no words. There was only the shared, unspoken weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about Aubrey anymore. This was about the company itself, about a system so broken, so fundamentally rotten, that it would protect a bully and blame a victim. As I pulled into our driveway and cut the engine, the sudden quiet was even heavier. John sat motionless for a long time, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at the warm, welcoming lights of our own home. It felt like a world away. Finally, he turned to me, his face pale and drawn in the dim light of the dashboard. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. They're not going to help me, are they? He whispered, the words barely audible over the drumming of the rain. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. They're on her side. That question hung in the air between us, heavy and cold in the confines of the car. They're on her side. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. A truth so bleak, it seemed to suck all the warmth from the small space. I reached over and placed my hand on his knee. Through the fabric of his trousers, I could feel a fine tremor, the vibration of a body pushed beyond its limits of endurance. We walked into the house in silence, the sound of our shoes on the hardwood floor echoing in the quiet. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows. John didn't take off his coat. He walked straight to the living room and sank into his favorite armchair, the one by the window. He didn't slump. He just folded into it, his shoulders caving in, his head bowed. He looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. The fight, the small spark of indignant energy he'd had at the HR office, was gone, replaced by a profound, hollowed-out exhaustion that frightened me more than any anger could have. This was the look he'd had in the weeks leading up to his diagnosis, a quiet, gré sur un dire. I knew, in that moment, that sending him back into that building would be like sending a soldier with a fresh wound back to the front line. He couldn't fight this. Not now. He needed a sanctuary, a place where he could simply heal without having to defend his own existence. I knelt in front of his chair and gently took his hands in mine. They were cold. "Honey," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "We're not going to play their game. We're not even going to set foot on their playing field. Tomorrow morning, you're calling Dr. Evans. You're going to tell him everything that's happened. The harassment. The meeting. All of it. We're not asking for a fight. We're asking for a fortress. We need distance." He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with a weary confusion. "What good will that do? Crystal, they don't care about doctor's notes. They will care about a formal accommodation request under the Americans with Disabilities Act," I said, the words feeling foreign but solid on my tongue. "This isn't about asking for a favor. It's about exercising a right. We build a wall between you and them. And we do it with paperwork they can't ignore." A flicker of something, not hope, but maybe the absence of complete despair passed through his eyes. He nodded slowly. A single, tired motion. The next afternoon, we were sitting in Dr. Blank, Evans's office. The doctor, a man whose calm competence had literally saved John's life, listened to the story without interruption. As John spoke, I watched the doctor's expression shift from professional concern to disbelief, and then to a cold, quiet fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped his pen. When John finished, the doctor put the pen down and looked at him, his gaze direct and unwavering. "This is obscene, Doctor," Even said, his voice tight. "This is precisely what the ADA was designed to prevent. A workplace is legally required to provide reasonable accommodations for a significant medical condition. Your recovery, John, is not optional, and for them to allow and even facilitate this kind of psychological torment while you are in this vulnerable state is not just profoundly unethical, it's illegal." The word illegal hung in the air, powerful and validating. It was the first time an authority figure had looked at our situation and called it what it was. It wasn't an interpersonal squabble. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation. Dr. Evans swiveled in his chair, pulled a stack of forms from a drawer, and began filling them out with a sharp, angry energy. He was writing a formal, ironclad request for John to work from home for the next month, citing the necessity of a stress-free environment for his physical recovery and the prevention of psychological distress that could actively impede his healing. "Let them argue with this, Doctor," Even said, sliding the signed paperwork across the desk. It felt less like a doctor's note and more like a weapon. We submitted the ADA paperwork to HR that same day. For 48 hours, there was only silence. It was a tense, anxious wait, where every ping of an incoming email made us both jump. Then, a reply finally landed in John's inbox. It was a short, terse email from Mark. The request was approved, effective immediately. There were no apologies, no words of support, just a cold, reluctant acceptance. The tone made it clear that they were not happy about it, that they viewed this as an annoyance, a concession they were being forced to make. But we didn't care. It was a victory. John was safe. He could work from the quiet of his home office, away from Aubrey's predatory gaze and HR's institutional cruelty. For the first few days, it was bliss. A fragile peace settled over our home. I'd see John at his desk, focused and productive. The deep lines of stress on his forehead beginning to soften. He was still tired, still healing, but he was no longer braced for an attack. The fortress was holding. We foolishly believed the war was over. But we had underestimated the obsessive nature of Aubrey's malice, and the company's tacit approval of it. The harassment didn't stop. It just changed its medium. It began to seep under the door. Through the wires. The emails started. The first one had the subject line, "A little motivation for you." Inside was a link to a high-intensity interval training video, featuring a screamingly enthusiastic instructor, and a PDF of a punishingly low-carb, high-protein diet plan. It was the kind of diet that would be dangerous for a perfectly healthy person, let alone someone whose entire digestive system had been rearranged. John stared at it, his face pale. He deleted it without a word. The next day, another one arrived. Subject thought you'd find this interesting. It was a link to her MLM's webpage, with a personal invitation to become a wellness coach on her team. It would give you something to focus on besides your situation. She wrote. They kept coming. An email every day. Links to articles about the myth of skinny fat, photos of her healthy meals, passive-aggressive motivational quotes. Each email was a small, digital paper cut. A reminder that he wasn't safe, that she could still reach him, that she was still watching. He began meticulously forwarding every single one to Mark in HR, with a simple, professional note. For your records, this is the continued harassment I spoke of. The first few times, there was no reply. Then, after he'd forwarded the 5th or 6th email, a response from Mark finally came. It was a single, infuriating sentence. Noted. Do you have an ETA for your return to the office? There was no acknowledgement of the harassment, no assurance that they would speak to her. Just a passive-aggressive nudge. And a clear message. This problem would go away if you would just come back and face your tormentor. It was a confirmation of everything we feared. HR wasn't just incompetent, they were complicit. At the end of the month, Dr. Evans, horrified by the new developments, extended John's work-from-home accommodation for another 30 days without hesitation. John forwarded the new paperwork to HR. This time, their response was different. It wasn't just dismissive. It was hostile. An email arrived. Not just from Mark, but CC'd to his own boss and the director of John's department. It was written in cold and clash. Formal corporate speak. It stated that, in light of his continued absence from the office, his physical presence was becoming an issue of significant concern. They wrote that his role required a level of in-office collaboration that his accommodation was preventing. It was a threat, veiled in the language of policy. A clear, unambiguous step towards firing him. They were building a case against him, using his legally protected medical leave as the foundation. John read the email 3 times, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the desk. They're trying to fire me, he said, his voice a choked whisper. They're going to fire me for being sick. Following the protocol he thought was right. He picked up the phone and called Mark directly, seeking clarification. I stood in the doorway of the office, my heart pounding against my ribs as I listened to his side of the conversation. Hi, Mark. It's John. Yes. I got your email. I was just hoping you could clarify what you meant by my presence being a concern. Given that I have an approved ADA accommodation, right? but my doctor has deemed it medically necessary. So the paperwork from my surgeon, the FMLA documentation we submitted, that doesn't... There was a long pause. I saw John's face go completely white, as if the blood had drained out of him all at once. He just listened, his eyes wide with a look of dawning horror. He finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "What did you just say?" Another pause. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I understand." He hung up the phone, placing the receiver back into its cradle with a slow, deliberate motion, as if it weighed 100 pounds. He stared at the wall for a full minute, completely still. "What did he say?" "John," I asked, my voice trembling. "What did he tell you?" He turned to look at me, and his eyes were filled with a terrifying, bleak emptiness. A look I hadn't seen since the day he was diagnosed. It was the look of a man who had been told his fate was sealed, that there was nothing he could do. He told me, John began, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion, that I needed to understand something about the company culture. He said, and this is an exact quote, "Medical paperwork. ADA. FMAA. That stuff doesn't hold much value here. You're not in the office, so you're not present. And that's a problem. I know." It was a confession, a bald-faced admission from a director of human resources that they considered themselves above the law, that the federal protections designed to shield people like John meant nothing to them. "It's the same thing. Crystal," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "It's the same thing as the doctors. For years, they just decided my pain wasn't real. They just decide. The facts don't matter. The law doesn't matter. They just decide you're a problem. And you're supposed to just take it. You're supposed to just disappear." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. All the fight was gone. They had finally broken him. Watching him crumble, seeing this strong, kind man reduced to a state of utter hopelessness by a soulless corporation and a workplace bully, something inside me shifted. The fear I had been living with for months, fear of his illness, fear for his job, the fear of the future, it didn't disappear. It crystallized. It hardened from a liquid dread into a cold, sharp, diamond-hard rage. My hands were steady. My vision was clear. I was done being scared. I was done being reactive. I walked over to him, put my hands on his shoulders, and waited for him to look up. "No," I said, my voice low and fierce, with a certainty that surprised even me. "We are not going to take it. You are not going to disappear. They have made a mistake. John. A huge, colossal, career-ending mistake. They wrote it down, and now they're going to pay for it." He looked at me, his face streaked with tears. "How?" "We stopped talking to them," I said. "We stopped playing their game by their broken rules. We don't do anything. John, we hire someone who does. I want you to go online. Right now. Find the best, most ruthless labor lawyer in this entire state. We are done playing defense." He stared at me, a new light beginning to dawn in his exhausted eyes. He slowly nodded. That night, long after I had gone to bed, I heard the soft, steady clicking of the keyboard from his office. I crept to the doorway and saw him sitting there, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitor. He was on the website of a top-tier employment law firm. His face was set, determined. As I watched, His hand moved to the mouse, the cursor hovering over a button that read "Submit for a free case evaluation." A took a deep, steadying breath and then, with a final, decisive movement, he clicked. The click of the mouse was a small, insignificant sound in the deep quiet of the house, but it felt like a gunshot marking the start of a race. I watched John from the doorway. He didn't move for a long moment, his hand still resting on the mouse. Then, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. A long, shuddering exhalation that carried with it the weight of his fear and indecision. He closed the laptop, the faint glow of the screen disappearing, plunging the room back into a soft darkness. For the first time since the disastrous HR meeting, the defeated slump was gone from his shoulders. He was still exhausted, still fragile. But now there was a thin, steel wire of purpose running through him. We had sent a flare up into the night, and now all we could do was wait to see if anyone would answer. The answer came faster than we expected. At 9:15 the next morning, an email appeared in his inbox. It was from the office of Anya Sharma, a senior partner at the law firm he had contacted. She had read his submission and wanted to schedule a video consultation for that very afternoon. Promptly at 2 o'clock, we were sitting side by side in our home office, staring at the laptop screen. A woman's face appeared, sharp and intelligent, with dark, discerning eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a simple, professional blouse, and behind her, a wall of law books stood in silent, orderly testament to her profession. She introduced herself as Anya Sharma. There was no patronizing sympathy in her voice, only a brisk, focused energy that was immediately reassuring. "I've read the summary you provided, John," she began, her tone direct. "It's a remarkable account of corporate malfeasance. I want you to walk me through it from the beginning. Every comment, every email, every meeting. Don't leave anything out." And so, John did. He recounted the story, his voice steady and clear. With every detail, he shared Aubrey's initial cruelty, the gym ambush, the public character assassination, the farcical mediation, and finally, the illegal threat from HR. I watched Anya's expression. It remained neutral, but her focus was absolute. She wasn't listening for the emotion, she was listening for the facts, the evidence, the violations. She was assembling a case in her head, fitting the pieces together. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, her gaze distant as she processed everything. John and I held our breath. "They put it in an email," she said, more to herself than to us. It wasn't a question. A small, incredulous smile touched her lips. "They actually put their illegal position in writing. John, your colleague Aubrey is a symptom of the disease. But she isn't the disease itself. The disease is a human resources department so arrogant and incompetent that they believe they are immune to federal law. That is our real target." The word target sent a thrill through me. This wasn't about defense anymore. "So, we sue them?" John asked, his voice tentative. "No," Anya said firmly, leaning forward. "Not yet. A lawsuit is a bazooka. You don't use a bazooka when a scalpel will do the job more cleanly and effectively. A lawsuit is public, messy, and slow. They will dig in their heels and their insurance company's lawyers will try to bleed you dry. Our first move is strategic. Internal escalation. We are going to give the highest levels of the company a chance to fix their own catastrophic mess. In doing so, We will either resolve this quickly, or they will further incriminate themselves. Either way, we win. She laid out the plan. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. John was to draft a single short email. It was to be addressed to the Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources, a woman named Catherine Albright, whose name Anya had already looked up. The email was not to be emotional. It was not to contain accusations or threats. It was to be a simple, professional inquiry. For the next hour, they crafted that email together. It was a masterclass in strategic communication. Anya dictated, explaining the reasoning behind every word choice. We don't say Mark threatened me, she instructed. We say, I am writing to seek clarification on the company's official position regarding ADA accommodations. We don't accuse, we inquire. We force them to put their official stance on the record. We attach all the relevant documents, the doctor's notes, the ADA forms, and the entire email chain with Mark, including his final, damning email. We CC you, Crystal, your direct supervisor, and me. We create a witness list right in the header. The final email was a work of art. It was polite, professional, and absolutely lethal. Subject seeking clarification on ADA accommodation policy. Dear Miss Albright, I am writing to respectfully request clarification on the company's official policy regarding medically necessary ADA accommodations. Following my recent major surgery, my physician provided documentation attached for me to work from home to facilitate my recovery. This was initially approved. However, in a subsequent email communication also attached, my local HR director, Mark, stated that such medical documentation does not hold much value within the company and that my legally protected absence is considered a presence issue. This seems to be in direct conflict with federal ADA and FMLA regulations. Could you please clarify the company's official corporate stance on this matter? Thank you for your time. John Smith. With Anya still on the video call, John attached the files, pasted in the list of CC'd names, and his finger hovered over the send button. He looked at me, his eyes wide. I gave him a firm nod. He took a breath and clicked. The email vanished into the ether. Now, we wait. Anya said, do not respond to anything from anyone at the company. All communication goes through me. They know you have a lawyer now. The game has changed. I'll be in touch. And the video call ended, leaving us in a profound silence. The next 24 hours were some of the longest of our lives. The house was quiet, but charged with a tense, nervous energy. Every time a phone buzzed or a laptop chimed with a notification, we both jumped. We tried to watch a movie, but neither of us could follow the plot. We made dinner, but barely touched our food. The silence was a constant question. Did it work, or did we just poke the bear and make everything worse? I kept picturing Mark and his bosses circling the wagons, preparing a counterattack, drafting John's termination letter. The fragile hope from the day before was starting to curdle into a familiar lawnen, sickening dread. Then, late the next afternoon, John's phone rang. It was an unknown number with the same area code as his corporate headquarters. He looked at me, his face pale. He let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, his phone buzzed with a notification. He played the message on speaker. The voice was female, crisp and professional. Mr. Smith. This is Elizabeth, executive assistant to Catherine Albright. Miss Albright has received your email and would like to schedule an urgent video conference with you to discuss this matter. She is available tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Um, please let me know if that time is convenient. John and I stared at each other. Urgent. The word echoed in the quiet room. It had worked. We hadn't been ignored. We had hit a nerve. And we had hit it hard. The next morning, after a strategy call with Anya, John sat at his desk, dressed in a button-down shirt for the first time in weeks. I sat just out of the camera's frame. A silent partner. My notepad and pen at the ready. Anya was patched in on a separate audio line, listening silently. At exactly 10 o'clock, a face appeared on the screen. It was Catherine Albright, the senior VP of HR. She looked to be in her late 50s, with immaculately styled silver hair and an expression of calm, formidable authority. She was exactly who you would expect to be at the top of a Fortune 500 company. Mr. Smith, she began, her voice smooth and controlled. Thank you for meeting with me. I received your email. I'd like to hear from you directly about the events that led to your writing it. There was no apology in her tone. It was guarded. Fact-finding. Anya had prepared him for this. Stay calm. John, just tell the story. No emotion. Just the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. And he did. With a calm, steady voice that belied the turmoil of the past few months, John walked her through everything. He started with Aubrey's first comment on his first day back. He detailed the gym incident, the public meeting, and the disastrous mediation with Mark. He explained the cyber harassment, forwarding Aubrey's daily emails. And finally, he described the threatening email about his presence and the subsequent phone call with Mark. Throughout his account, Miss Albright's expression remained a mask of corporate neutrality. She nodded occasionally, her face unreadable. I felt a pang of fear. Maybe she was just like them. Another suit protecting the system. And this email from Mark, she said when John had finished, where he states that medical documents don't have value. You have that in writing. Yes. I do. John said calmly. I attached the full chain to the email I sent you. I can share my screen and show it to you right now. If you'd like? Please do. She said. This was the moment, the firing of the Chekhov's gun. With a few clicks, John shared his screen. The email chain appeared. He scrolled down to the bottom. To Mark's final, arrogant, career-destroying message. He highlighted the sentence, medical paperwork. ADA. FMLA. That stuff doesn't hold much value here. I wasn't looking at the screen. I was watching Catherine Albright's face. And for the first time, the mask cracked. It was a subtle shift, but it was undeniable. Her eyes widened. Just for a second. A muscle in her jaw tightened. The blood seemed to drain from her face, leaving her looking suddenly older. And deeply, profoundly alarmed. She forgot, for a moment, that she was on camera. She was no longer a corporate executive. She was a lawyer looking at a signed confession to a federal crime. She stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds. When she finally looked back up, her entire demeanor had changed. The corporate polish was gone, replaced by a raw, undisguised horror. Mr. Smith, John, she said, her voice strained. I am utterly horrified. Please, stop sharing your screen. John did. On behalf of the entire company, I cannot find the words to express how profoundly sorry I am. What you have experienced is not just unacceptable, it is an absolute failure at every level. This is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. And I am going to make this right. Immediately, the dam of her corporate composure had broken. She looked genuinely shaken. First things first, she said, already shifting into damage control mode. I want you to take an immediate, indefinite paid medical leave of absence. Don't worry about work. Don't worry about your projects. Your only job right now is to focus on your health and your family. We will conduct a full, top-to-bottom investigation into this entire matter. The situation with your colleague, Aubrey, and the conduct of the HR department will be dealt with swiftly and decisively. You have my word on that. In my ear, I heard Ennia's voice. A soft, triumphant whisper. Don't say anything. John, just nod. John nodded. A week later, John got a text from his friendly colleague, Sarah. It was a screenshot of an internal memo announcing a restructuring of their regional HR department. Underneath it, Sarah had typed, "They're gone. Mark and the other woman from your meeting. They cleared out their desks yesterday. Not a word. Just gone." It was the first real taste of justice. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees weak washed over me. They were gone. But Aubrey was still there. We had another week of blessed, uninterrupted peace. John was finally able to rest. Truly rest. Without the threat of his job hanging over his head. The color started to return to his face. He was smiling more. We started to feel like we could finally breathe again. And then, on a bright Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. We were in the living room. My mother-in-law was visiting, playing on the floor with our son. John was dozing in the armchair. I went to the door, assuming it was a package delivery. I glanced through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Aubrey. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by 2 other women. All 3 of them dressed in matching athletic wear, clutching clipboards and tote bags emblazoned with the logo of her MLM company. They were smiling bright, predatory, sales pitch smiles. Before I could even think, my mother-in-law, a sweet, gentle woman who wouldn't normally hurt a fly, got up and opened the door, assuming it was one of our neighbors. Aubrey's smile widened, her eyes scanning past my mother-in-law, trying to peer into our house. "Hi," she chirped, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "Is John home? We're here to present a wellness opportunity that could absolutely change his life." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was here, at our house. She had crossed the final, sacred line. My hand, shaking with a surge of pure adrenaline, was already reaching for my phone. My thumb scrolling through my contacts, looking for one name, Anya Sharma. The world seemed to slow down, the cheerful chirping of birds outside our window sounding distant and distorted. My breath caught in my chest. Aubrey, at our door. The audacity of it was a physical blow. A violation so profound, it left me momentarily paralyzed. She had taken a conflict that was contained within the sterile, impersonal walls of a corporation and had dragged it here, to the one place on earth we were supposed to be safe. Her bright, artificial smile was an obscenity on our doorstep. But before my shock could curdle into a panicked rage, something incredible happened. My mother-in-law, Carol, a woman whose greatest asserted opinion was usually about the proper way to bake a pie, took a small, deliberate step forward, physically blocking the doorway. She was a good foot shorter than Aubrey and her 2 silent, clone-like companions. But in that moment, She seemed to grow, radiating an authority that was absolute and unquestionable. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud. It was not angry. It was perfectly calm, perfectly level, and colder than any winter morning. It was the voice of a mother protecting her young, and it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. "I have no idea who you are," Carol said, her eyes fixed on Aubrey's, unblinking. "But my son is inside recovering from major surgery. This is a private residence. You are trespassing." Aubrey's practiced, predatory smile faltered. Confusion flickered in her eyes. This was not part of the script. She had come prepared for a vulnerable, weakened man, not a 5'4" wall of maternal iron. "Oh, I think there's a misunder," Aubrey began, trying to recover, her voice still syrupy sweet. Carol cut her off, her voice dropping another 10 degrees. "There is no misunderstanding. You have 10 seconds to get off this property before I call the police and report you for harassment." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The threat was not a bluff. It was a promise. The two women flanking Aubrey exchanged a nervous glance. Their MLM-fueled confidence evaporated under the heat of Carol's quiet, unyielding gaze. Aubrey's face flushed a blotchy, ugly red. The mask of the caring wellness coach had disintegrated, revealing the thwarted bully beneath. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. She had been so completely shut down. Without another word, she turned on her heel, and the three of them practically scuttled back down our driveway, their matching tote bags swinging with their hasty, undignified retreat. Carol watched them until their car had sped away down the street. Then she closed the door, the soft click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive victory. She turned around, her face immediately softening as she saw me standing there, my phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "Well," she said with a small, satisfied sigh, "I don't think they'll be back." The spell of my paralysis broke. Adrenaline, sharp and clean, surged through me. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. This was it. This was the final piece of evidence. The move so arrogant, so far beyond any acceptable boundary, that it would burn Aubrey's entire defense to the ground. While my mother-in-law went to check on John, who had woken up from the commotion, I went straight to the computer. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up the footage from our doorbell camera. There she was, clear as day, her face plastered in that fake smile. Her two accomplices behind her. I took a screenshot. I opened a new email, addressing it to Catherine Albright and CCing Anya Sharma. The subject line was simple: "Urgent harassment has escalated to my home. Dear Miss Albright." Further to our conversation last week, I am writing to inform you that the harassment from your employee, Aubrey, has now escalated to a deeply alarming degree. This afternoon, she appeared uninvited at our private residence, accompanied by two other individuals, in an attempt to confront my husband. This has moved beyond a workplace issue and is now a matter of my family's personal safety and security. I have attached a time-stamped image from our security camera for your reference. I trust that you will now take the final AUEG. Decisive action you promised. Sincerely, Crystal Smith. I attached the image and hit send. There was no hesitation. There was no fear. There was only the cold, hard certainty of a trap being sprung. We had given Aubrey every chance to stop. She had chosen, instead, to walk straight over a cliff, Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Anya. I just got off the phone with Catherine Albright's legal counsel, she said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of grim satisfaction. They are apoplectic. You did the right thing. Crystal, you did it perfectly. Stand by. I believe you'll be hearing from Miss Albright directly, very soon. She was right. The call came 2 days later. On a Monday morning, it was Catherine Albright herself. Her voice was somber, heavy with a gravity that had been absent from our first call. Mrs. Smith, she began, dispensing with any preamble. First, let me ask, are you and your family safe? Has there been any further contact? We are safe, and there has been no contact, I replied. Good, she said, and I heard her exhale. I am calling to inform you that as of 9 a.m. this morning, Aubrey is no longer an employee of this company. Her behavior was inexcusable, and her decision to bring her harassment to your home was a final, unforgivable act. I want to offer you my most sincere, personal apology for the profound failure of our systems and personnel to protect your husband and your family. We let you down. I let you down. The words, Aubrey is no longer an employee, sank in slowly. It was over. The primary source of our torment was gone. Furthermore, Miss Albright continued. Our internal investigation has confirmed your account of the regional HR department's conduct. We have uncovered a deeply toxic culture of cronyism and a shocking disregard for employee welfare and federal law. The restructuring I mentioned is only the beginning. We have offered John the paid medical leave for as long as his doctor deems it necessary, but that is not enough. The company would also like to offer a significant financial settlement to compensate for the emotional distress and personal damages you and John have endured. Our legal counsel will be in touch with Miss Sharma to discuss the details. She was offering restitution, a tangible acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. It wasn't about the money. It was about the admission. It was about them finally, unequivocally, taking responsibility. Thank you, Miss Albright, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. No, Mrs. Smith, she said quietly. Thank you. You and your husband have exposed a serious sickness within our organization. You have given us the painful but necessary opportunity to begin curing it. After I hung up, I walked back into the living room where John was sitting, reading a book. He looked up, his expression questioning. I didn't have to say a word. He saw it on my face. She's gone, I said, my voice breaking. Aubrey. She's fired. And Mark. All of them. It's over. John, it's really over. He closed the book and placed it carefully on the table beside him. He leaned his head back against the armchair and closed his eyes. He didn't cheer. He didn't shout. A single tear traced a path from the corner of his eye down his temple. He just breathed. It took a long, slow, deep breath. The first truly untroubled breath I had seen him take in months. It was the breath of a man who had been underwater for too long and had finally broken the surface. A profound, bone-deep sense of relief washed over me. So powerful, it felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. All the tension, all the sleepless nights, all the simmering rage and gnawing anxiety that had become our constant companions, it all just dissolved. I went over to him, and he pulled me onto his lap, wrapping his arms around me. We sat there for a long time, in the quiet of our safe, protected living room, just holding each other. It wasn't a hug of passion or excitement. It was a hug of shared survival, a silent acknowledgement of the battle we had fought and, against all odds, had won. In the weeks that followed, a new, peaceful normal began to take root. John's health improved dramatically without the constant, grinding stress of the conflict. The color returned to his cheeks, his laughter, a sound I hadn't realized how much I'd missed, started to fill the house again. He never had any intention of going back. The company, through Anya, had been incredibly accommodating. But the trust was irrevocably broken. The settlement they offered was more than fair, a clear sign of how much legal jeopardy they knew they were in. It gave us a cushion, a runway for him to heal completely and decide what came next. One afternoon, I walked into the office and saw him on his laptop, but instead of company emails, he had his resume open. He was carefully rephrasing his experience, tailoring it for a new kind of future. He was only looking at fully remote positions, companies with modern, flexible cultures. He wasn't just looking for a new job, he was designing a new, healthier life. One where he had control. One where his well-being would never again be at the mercy of a toxic manager or a broken system. Looking back on it all, the lesson is painfully clear. They counted on him being too sick and too tired to fight back. They saw his vulnerability not as a reason for compassion, but as an opportunity to wield their petty power. They underestimated him. They underestimated his quiet strength, his unyielding integrity. They underestimated both of us. We learned that sometimes the systems designed to help you will fail. And in those moments, you have to become your own advocate, your own warrior. We learned that documenting everything is not paranoia, it's armor. And that seeking professional help, a guide who knows the battlefield, can be the single most important decision you make. A few months have passed now. It's a bright morning. From where I'm sitting, I can see into John's new home office. He's on a video call. And he's laughing. A genuine, easy laugh with his new colleagues. He looks healthy, strong. He looks like himself again. The sun is streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Our son is playing with his blocks on the floor nearby, creating a world of his own. The house is quiet, filled with a simple, Ardwin peace. It's a beautiful, boring, perfectly normal day. And it's everything we fought for.